Every year, people go missing inside of national parks and forests. However, there are always a few cases where a handful of people go missing under unexplainable circumstances. 1 minute they're with their family and friends, and then the next they vanish into thin air. And today, we are going to look into one of the latter. On the afternoon of December 5th, 1998, Derrick Engerbretson, his dad Robert, and 64-year-old grandfather Bob set out for a densely wooded mountainside above Upper Klamath Lake near Pelican Butte. Their plan was to find a Christmas tree for the holiday season, but unfortunately, that never happened. Eight-year-old Derrick was also known as Bear Boy because of his love of the outdoors. When he was a week old, his mother put him in a baby body sling and carried him along on a bear hunt. He grew up hunting with his father and mushroom picking with his mother. The Engerbretson family hadn't planned to go to the woods that year to go Christmas tree hunting. Lori, Robert's wife, had actually talked him into using an artificial tree that year, despite the fact that he was an enthusiastic outdoorsman who always looked forward to the family's annual Christmas tree hunt. Lori wanted less mess, but when a disabled neighbor asked for a real tree, Robert headed out for a densely wooded mountainside in the Wine-Maw National Forest, above Upper Klamath Lake near Pelican Butte. Upper Klamath Lake is a large, shallow freshwater lake in south-central Oregon. Pelican Butte is a steep-sided, dormant volcano that rises over 3,800 feet above the shore of Klamath Lake. The family visited this area often and was very familiar with the grounds. As Bob's red Toyota pickup climbed the West Side Road, Robert told his father they couldn't hang around and take their time as they usually did when they went looking for a Christmas tree, as it was already after 2 p.m., and it would be getting dark around 4 since it was late in the year. Bob pulled into a turnout at milepost 12 on the way to Rocky Point Resort, where the three would be staying. They hopped out, and Robert helped little Derrick get into his blue snowsuit, and they all started up an embankment into the pine forest. Robert walked ahead of the other two, telling Derrick to stay with his grandfather. As Derrick chopped at small trees with his hatchet, he nagged his grandfather that he wanted to catch up with his dad, who by this time had walked quite a few hundred feet in front of them and was no longer in sight. Bob eventually relented, and then Derrick headed off, apparently after his father. At about 3 p.m., with darkness closing in, Robert and Bob met up and immediately asked each other, "Where's Derrick?" A wave of panic came over the two as they realized they both thought the boy was with the other. Robert turned and sprinted back up the hill as heavy, wet snow fell steadily. He shouted out for Derrick, but there was no response. At 4:13, Robert flagged down a man driving along the road, Fred Hines, asking him to call 911 to ask for help from the authorities. Now again, this was back in 1998, when cell phones were not as common to have as they are now. So Fred made the call from the resort, which was 10 miles from the area of Derrick's disappearance. Eventually, the police arrived and began searching for Derrick. In fact, throughout the night and for the next 2 weeks, hundreds of people searched through snow several feet thick, looking for Derrick on foot and using snowmobiles and dogs. Lori built a bonfire at the centralized meeting spot for the volunteers, sleeping in a donated camper van, hoping Derrick would see it and come to her. Delirious from lack of sleep, she once thought she saw Derrick walk out of the woods toward her, waving and smiling. But unfortunately, it was not the case. In the hours immediately after Derrick's disappearance, Robert and other members of the family found Derrick's tracks in the newly fallen snow. The boy's small boot prints made a short loop from the spot where Bob had last seen him to a clearing near the road, where Derrick had laid down to make a snow angel. By early evening on the day of his disappearance, the snowfall was estimated at 5 to 8 inches. Unfortunately, a snowplow had come by, obliterating the tracks that led away from the angel. They were, however, fairly certain that no tracks led from the angel back toward the woods. Everyone felt certain that Derrick hadn't walked back into the trees. A candy wrapper and a makeshift shelter made out of branches were discovered a few days later, but it was unclear whether they were connected to Derrick. Family members were convinced that Derrick had made his way to the road and might have been picked up by a stranger. However, the sheriff did not agree with this theory. They believed he fell victim to the elements. A hole in the ice was discovered in the lake by Bob during the search, and a child's footprint on the bank. Divers searched the next day, and an additional search was done in the area during the spring thaw. However, the idea that Derrick may have drowned was ultimately found unlikely, as the police felt that the boy's hatchet would be in the lake if he had fallen in. If a hatchet were found in the sediment of the cove, it could be assumed that the boy died there. Portland diver Jeff Priest spent several hours carefully working his way through the shallow water using a metal detector designed to work underwater. He found several metal objects, including an oil filter and a metal road sign, but no hatchet. The official search ended 8 days after Derrick disappeared, when Klamath County authorities told Lori and Robert that their son was likely to be dead. Yet Robert, Lori, and at least 100 volunteers stayed on the mountain for another 7 days. On December 18, 1998, sub-zero temperatures forced the Engerbretsons to end the search. But every weekend for the next 2 years, Robert drove straight from his graveyard shift at work to the mountain, meeting Lori. They kept a map marking areas where they'd searched. There was plenty of criticism of the search and rescue efforts, as many believed authorities had been slow to get to the scene the night that Derrick disappeared. The search was not started for nearly 5 hours after the first 911 call by the passing motorist, because the coordinator was reluctant to interrupt the Christmas dinner for Klamath County Search and Rescue Team's annual awards dinner until he was sure a rescue was actually warranted. Robert and Bob both passed polygraphs, but some in the community were convinced that they may have murdered Derrick or been negligent in some way. Robert stopped speaking to his father. He blamed himself for not finding Derrick, but he blamed Bob for losing him. Bob Engerbretson was too racked with guilt to even talk Robert into forgiving him. Robert had taken a lot of time off work. At the same time, the couple had spent thousands of dollars searching for Derrick, paying for psychics and a boat to search Klamath Lake, eventually causing them to go bankrupt. Authorities concluded that Derrick had wandered off into the woods and died, and animals had scattered his remains. But the Engerbretson family didn't believe that, especially as no evidence had been found such as bones or torn clothing. This was supported by a witness who said he'd seen a man struggling with a boy along a nearby highway. In 1999, some graffiti was scrawled on a rest area bathroom wall near the area where Derrick disappeared, which said Derrick had been killed and buried, but the FBI insisted it was a hoax. A boy named Derrick, who was found in Texas under unusual circumstances, looked a lot like the Engerbretsons' son, but proved to be someone else. Then, in late 2001, a handwritten letter arrived in the family mailbox that read, "I know who took your son." Before we get into the rest of today's episode, I want to first thank you for tuning in today. I spend a lot of time each week putting together content for the channel, and I appreciate you taking out time to view it. However, the best way you can support me is liking this video and leaving a comment below. Again, thank you for being here. Now let's get back to the story. On July 11, 2000, Frank Milligan, a 31-year-old state youth authority worker, approached a 10-year-old boy at a Dallas park and offered him $100 to mow his lawn. When he reached Frank's car, Frank said to him, "Do you want to live or die?" Frank then bound the boy's hands with duct tape and forced him into the car. He stopped just north of Salem and forced the boy to walk down a dirt road and assaulted him. Frank choked him and pushed his face into the dirt so hard he blacked out. He then cut the child's throat and left him for dead. But against all odds, the boy woke up. Covered with blood, he got to a road where a passing motorist stopped to help. At the time of the attack, Frank was out on bail from the Clatsop County Jail, accused of a 1997 attack on an 11-year-old boy. Detectives tracked him down, and he eventually pleaded guilty in both cases. Months later, Frank's cellmate wrote a letter to police and the Engerbretsons saying that Frank had confessed to abducting and killing Derrick. It arrived at the Engerbretson home in late 2001. An Oregon State Police detective who had investigated the case confronted Frank. Frank confessed to killing Derrick and agreed to lead detectives to the body. Lori and Robert drove 5 hours to Silver Falls State Park, where their son was said to be buried, and waited as the FBI used a ground-penetrating radar to scan for Derrick's bones. After several days of searching, they came up with nothing. But a Marion County Assistant District Attorney told the Engerbretsons that Frank had agreed to plead guilty to killing Derrick if they agreed to spare him the death penalty. Unfortunately, when Frank faced the paperwork a few days later, he refused to sign. Sadly, as of today, Derrick has never been found. This is definitely a mysterious case, and I'm curious to know what you guys think. Did Derrick die of cold or from an animal attack as the sheriff thought, or was he abducted by Frank Milligan or another pedophile? Or did something else happen on that fateful and sad day in December 1998? Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.